Every character, location, or experience you've read about in my crime fiction novels holds a piece of reality. I'm Helen Taylor. Welcome to the story behind my stories, the video podcast where crime fiction meets my authentic experience. Here, we delve into the real-life inspirations and intimate stories that shaped my novels. Discover how my everyday encounters, adventures, and travels translate into tales as gripping as they are genuine. The story behind my stories goes behind the words on the page to reveal the backstory that inspires my writing. Hit follow or subscribe and ensure you're part of this journey. Hi, welcome to episode 6 of the story behind Connecting Trains. Now, we started with the first 2 weeks talking about my life around the areas and stations and the use of the train line that I had as my location experience for Connecting Trains. And then we moved on to the characters as my experience of working in the corporate world for many years in IT and financial services and now environmental reporting has always been the other aspect of Connecting Trains and the whole team thing with the investigative team. And we talked about Neil's in week 3, which is like Goodwin's right hand man. Then we talked about Payne in week 4, who is the negative guy, but also the social guy, the guy that knows everybody. And then we talked last week about Penny Stock, the IT expert. So today I want to talk a little bit more about the team dynamics and the 4 unknown members of the team to Goodwin. So I am going to read a chunk of the start of the book because it is very much around those team dynamics side of things. At 2:30, 4 strangers walked into the room and Steve Payne, not surprisingly, was bringing up the rear. They each approached Goodwin and introduced themselves. He had seen 3 of them around and had heard things about some of them through other DIs that had worked with them, but one of them was a new recruit to the MIT, so an unknown quantity. From what he knew, from reports and things he had been told, he had a good team here that he thought complemented each other and could work together well. For a moment, he thought they may be wasted on a series of burglaries, but he caught himself and opened the meeting. So you can already see that Goodwin is looking at it as a set of skills that can complement each other. After introducing each member of the team and himself, he stood out in front of them all and gave them all a rundown on the way he liked to work. I felt this was important to bring in at the start because knowing what is expected of you as a team member, as well as what he expects from them, no, that's the same thing, isn't it? What he expects from them and what they expect from him is important. It's like laying your cards on the table. This is what I expect, this is how it's going to work, and then you always know where you stand. And as he's worked with a few of them, but he hadn't worked with some of the others, setting that out at the start is I felt was something that a team leader would do. And one thing maybe you should know I did have a chief inspector from Essex Police at the time that I was writing this, did completely review it for police procedural, and did actually, the comment that came back was that it was the best and closest to actual police procedure that he'd ever read in a fiction book. So I was really pleased with that, and he obviously gave me some tips and some highlights and things like that. But for me, understanding the team and the dynamics and the way they work, you've been introduced to Goodwin in tie-dye, but that was all very personal. This is him in his professional life, and many of us are different. So he wants to give them a rundown of how he works. If you screw up, I want to know about it. I don't want any arse covering. I want honesty and responsibility, and I definitely don't want to find out the hard way. If you are straight with me, I'll be straight with you, and we'll get along fine. He made eye contact with each and every one of them in turn, checking they had understood his meaning, then sat himself on one side of the desk DC Payne and one of the new guys were sitting at. So then they go on to talk about some of the facts in the case. And he invites them to brainstorm some ideas. And he asks Graham to run them through some simple facts. Graham Hall had worked with Bowman, who you might remember is Goodwin's boss, before, but never with Goodwin. He was a couple of years older than Goodwin, with almost complete hair loss on top of his head, but this was compensated by the 2 furry caterpillars over each eye, which moved with a life of their own as he spoke. Graham Hall picks up and runs them through that. And then Goodwin says, "Great, thanks. Horton, what about the attacks? Planned or a mistake?" Goodwin knew the answer, but always used this first meeting to gauge his team. He liked to know they had read the files, but it was always a surprise to see differing opinions on the evidence, and usually threw something out. But at least this exercise got everyone focused and thinking individually and as a team, as they saw where each of them went with their ideas and theories. So not only did I try and get across that Goodwin doesn't know all of them, and some of them he does know, but none of them within the team have worked with each other either. So he has that added responsibility of showing each of them where they sit in the team to make it an effective team to be able to solve these crimes. So then he talks about that, and it says Ben Horton, the unknown quantity, on the graduate fast track, young, enthusiastic and eager to make his mark. And then I introduce a bit further down. This insight came from David Dean, another DC Goodwin had heard about. Runs with his gut feelings, a little like Goodwin, but more so, and from what he had heard, was usually spot on. So David Dean is the gut man in the team. Goodwin is a gut man too, but he tempers it a bit because he's a senior officer and has maybe not always got quite as much contact with the scene, the victims, the families of the victims, to necessarily be able to 100% trust his gut, almost as if his gut doesn't have enough information. Whereas David Dean very much runs on his gut. And he has the experience to be able to do that too, because he's just those couple of years older than Goodwin himself. And that's obviously something that Ben Horton, the unknown quantity, has no experience of. He has no experience of the procedures they follow, the way the investigation works, working in a team like this. He might have had graduate training and he might have a degree, don't know what in, but he doesn't have the experience. And so both Goodwin, Steve Payne and David Dean are all quite up there in age experience of life in general, but also of the working in the police and in the MIT team. So then Dean explains something more, and Goodwin liked his thought process and it felt right as well as logically giving them a motive. So then again, a little bit further on, Horton enthused, wanting to redeem himself because he'd said something that Payne had dismissed a little bit earlier. So you can already get some of the dynamics and the way that they behave. Now don't forget, as you're reading this, as I wrote it and as you're reading it, these guys are living it. I know that sounds daft because it's fiction, but in my head they are. So they are getting to know each other and getting to understand how they work as a team. Almost in my head as I'm writing it, I switch between the different personalities. And like I said last week, I think, aspects of each of their personalities are reflections of my own. So not one of them is me, but little bits of me is in each of them, so that I have that perspective and I can write it in that way. Mainly so that it comes across to you who's reading it as genuine and authentic, because it is, and it has come from that place. There's no AI working it out. I mean, when I wrote this 20 years ago, there was no AI anyway. But also there's no superficial, they're just members of the team and they're just there. I want you to feel that you're part of the team too. And so you need to get to know all these little things, and you need to observe, which is what you're doing when you're reading the book, the dynamics of the team, so that you can predict things and understand where each of them are coming from. It sort of makes it a bit psychological because you're getting into the mind of them if I reveal a lot about that. But hopefully it enhances your enjoyment of reading the book because you feel like you know these people. And hopefully when you get to the end of the book, you want to know what happens to these people. And so look forward to A Lower Goodbye, where two of the people from Connecting Trains help Goodwin on that investigation. And then in Lethal Leith Hill, the team's back together. So, Goodwin is using the dynamic here. He says, okay, I want someone to go back and talk to the victims of all the burglaries about recent work done at the premises. Workman could fit our possible grudge motive, would know the place without needing to case it, and would know the movements of the householders, any takers. Payne, predictably, busied himself with cleaning any dirt from beneath his fingernails. Goodwin was tempted to give it to him because he knew how much he would dislike it, but then Horton jumped in. "I'll take it, sir." Goodwin added Horton's initials. That's the young enthusiasm wanting to do it. He then asks Angela to go to the family of the old man, but we don't know at this point anything about Angela. We don't even have a reference from what he'd been previously told. And then he says Tim, a middle-aged, nondescript sort of man, silent but thorough, had been the feedback on him, stated just one word: "Lunchtime, sir." Angela continued, "Yes, I noticed that. They all seem to be around lunchtime." So those two are just sort of on the periphery. We don't know anything about them yet, and they've not had a lot to say in this initial meeting, getting to know people. And then, so as well as in the corporate world, appraisals of staff are required too. So there was murmurs of agreement filled the room. Goodwin was uncomfortable with it, but talked himself into it with his usual logical thought process. That's part of the investigation. And then he goes on and says, also, if they had done work there before, even more so. Horton, your investigation of recent work at the victims' houses is key in this, I think. Goodwin liked that. It would show the youngster some responsibility and be a good way of seeing how he handled his investigation. He knew he would be expected to give a report on Horton's performance at the end of this, so the more information he had to go on, the more accurate his report could be. "Sir," Horton puffed up with the new importance of his role. So there you can see that already Horton's very much needing the validation from Goodwin, and he's eager. He really wants to do a good job and get him on side, and Goodwin is very much understanding that he's going to have to review the performance of this young graduate. Again, there's another bit here where we understand people. Although Payne said nothing, the sigh and forced slump in his chair let Goodwin and the rest of the team know he wasn't happy. Goodwin hid a smile as he looked again at his notebook. He looked up, straight-faced again, and spoke to DC David Dean. "David, can you go along with Horton on the workman angle? It was your idea, and maybe you can get a feel for the victims and whether they fit our idea as grudge victims." So there, Goodwin is playing to the strength of David Dean and his gut feelings, and also putting a more experienced officer with the newbie, and David Dean knew exactly what he was doing, so he turns around and says, "Will do, sir, no problem." Dean nodded to Horton with a look that said he would observe but not interfere with Horton's investigation. Goodwin was pleased with the look. He knew he couldn't send Horton out alone. Dean was a good investigator and would pick up anything Horton missed, but wouldn't step on his toes. He would let the youngster find his own feet and would also give Goodwin some valuable feedback on how he performed. They continued brainstorming, but nothing new came to the surface. So that really does let you know that each of the team members are sort of getting the idea of where they sit, and Goodwin is not just running an investigation, he is running a team, and that is important, not just through Connecting Trains, but for all future books where they work together as a team, because we need to know how they all work together, the group dynamic, how they all fit, and understand the conflicts, because there will be some, especially with pain. But having supportive people and the youngsters, etc., all adds to the dynamic, and what could be a great opportunity to have a smart team, but also the potential opportunity to have a team that can't work together, can't gel together, and that is all the responsibility of Goodwin. Now, I'm not going to do Angela, because Angela becomes quite a key non-team player in connecting trains. So I'm going to leave it for next week's episode to go into Angela and Tim, because they're working together, and that's where it all sort of starts going horribly wrong. But hopefully you can see with the sections in the book and a couple of the extracts that I've read you, that when they have the team meetings, how well Goodwin negotiates the different personalities and members of the team to bring them together to achieve exactly what it is that they want to achieve. And it's a learned skill, but there is also a skill in management. And, my experience is managing a team, but mine is in the corporate world, where, you're talking project management and system management, client management I do now. So it's still not dissimilar. An investigation is like a project, but this is such higher stakes. In the corporate world, it might be financial high stakes on whether a project succeeds or not, but in a criminal investigation, the project, the stakes are much higher for success. And so the team, I really want the team to be a cracking team so that they can solve many more crimes in many more books. But they have to have their foibles, there has to be the conflict, and they can't all be superheroes working in a team together. They all need those quirks of all of us that we have to a greater or lesser extent, and other people have to a greater or lesser extent. It's the ability to get them to work together and complement each other. And it will be next week when we talk about Angela and Tim and how they, depending on how what they do is dealt with, could make or break the team. And I'm not going to give away whether it makes it, breaks it, or anything about what it has. But that's all for next week. So thank you once again for listening, and I will catch you all again next week. Bye.